Well, tonight, whether you like him or not, no one debates that New York is a polarized place under Mayor Bill de Blasio. But the question is, what would it look like if instead it was Mayor Quinn? We'll sit down and ask her that. She's here for an extended conversation. And an Oklahoma Reserve Sheriff's deputy facing manslaughter charges after he's caught on tape killing a suspect during a sting operation. But what's exactly a 73-year-old volunteer doing at a scene like this armed to begin with? Our legal panel will weigh in. Also, former NFL player Aaron Hernandez found guilty today of first-degree murder. Police they never found the gun, and the jury took several days to deliberate. Certainly no angel here, but there are questions whether or not there was enough evidence to convict him. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and we will begin in New York City and with his honor. In his first year in office, he has been called a polarizing figure, and that's even from some supporters. He's also trying to be the biggest national voice when it comes to progressive and populist causes. Now, for a while, it certainly didn't look that he would be the person calling Gracie Mansion home. Take a look at the poll numbers. Christine Quinn considered the prohibitive favorite early on in the primary process here. So what would she have done differently? Well, luckily, she's joining us here. We're going to ask her that, and also some hot button issues, certainly in New York City. Thank you so much. I appreciate a few minutes. All right. I know you got a lot going on. We'll talk about Harvard. We'll talk about your work with the governor. But as an observer like us in the first year, what do you think? You know what? That was difficult, nuanced. You did a pretty good job. And what do you think were problems that could have been avoided the last 12 months?
Well, look, it's, and I know this because I wanted the job, but it's a tough job. And you got to give Mayor de Blasio a lot of credit for having the successes that he has already had. And a lot of them, people said, were never going to happen. So the fact that we took the pre-kindergarten program that we had and made it really for all 4-year-olds with a real option for full day for everyone who wants it, that's an enormous accomplishment. And many people, myself included, I have to say, didn't think that was possible to get done in the first year. He wanted a tax increase with that, didn't get that, but was kind of not thwarted, still moved forward and made that happen. I think that's a great accomplishment. In the midst of this country being so stuck on immigration, it's quite frankly a sin. He moved forward with an ID card that I think is a real statement about New York being an immigrant city, about the way the rest of this country needs to respect immigrants. That's something, I had really wanted to do as Speaker. We had opposition from then Mayor Bloomberg. So I'm really happy and thrilled to see that happening and to see the demand for it. People, they were overwhelmed, and I can't criticize them for that.
There wasn't nearly as much pushback. But, come on, how about the other side? You're not a politician anymore. I'll say to you, if you were mayor...
Don't be burning my bridges for me, Richard.
All right, but we'll say this. We first guessed it at the time. He's a mayor, and he's got the police commissioner and Reverend Sharpton sitting at the dais. Forget that they weren't crazy about that at Police Plaza, and nobody would have forecast some of the other events that happened in a very difficult summer.
And tragic. I mean, those were tragic.
Absolutely.
Tragic.
But was the problems that we saw in Staten Island and also that's fomented with NYPD and the mayor's office partly of the mayor's own making?
Look, we have a national crisis right now as it relates to police community relations. And I don't use the word crisis lightly, but the facts are tragically clear, and every time you open the paper, just about, there's another young black man who's dead at the hands of police. You can't believe, you know.
And we're going to spend some time, the four of us, talking about policing and what we're seeing nationally, but also back here in a second. But
so look, it's a tough issue. And it's a tough issue because it is a crisis. It's a tough issue because we're talking about life and death of individuals out there. And it's a tough issue because police also feel like they're getting painted with one broad brush, and that the police officers who are doing the bad and at times illegal things are becoming the definition of all of the rest of the officers. And it is important, particularly for those of us like myself who are concerned about putting an end to this police violence, that we do recognize that the vast majority of police officers are terrific people who are putting their lives on the line every day, and sometimes losing them, or, as we saw where I am now up in Boston, a police officer shot in the face, being gravely injured, and we have to make sure we keep that part of the discussion as well. But obviously that's been there's no way around it, a very problematic issue for the mayor, from both sides, with the police being very angry, but then also the community not being fully satisfied either.
So why do you think Mayor de Blasio is so polarizing, or seems to come across that way? Is it something he's doing, or would anybody in that office be considered polarizing? Would Mayor Quinn have been a polarizing mayor?
Well, clearly I would have been. I mean, it would have been rioting, crazy, all kinds, anti-redheaded lobbying, don't dye your hair campaigns, the whole 9 yards.
Is it the job, or is it something specific about Mayor de Blasio?
Well, look, I mean, polarizing, I'm not sure I want to buy into that word. One, but
it's real. Come on, even those who were critics of Bloomberg, they didn't have the same passion of anger that they're having towards this mayor, who wants to be the poster child of progressiveness nationally here. It's palpable out there, and it's not just the Eric Garner case. It's more than that.
Right. No, that's very fair. But I think your point is fair too. This job is a job that gets looked at, as it should, under the microscope. And it is a job, although it's what many have called, the second hardest job in the world after the President of the United States, it's still a local position, right? So that dynamic of it's your mayor. You can get to their house. You can, get right outside their office. That localness of it raises, I think, the demands people put on it and the speed with which they want things addressed. Now, look, also, the mayor, and this happens a lot in campaigns, when Mayor de Blasio ran, and, I was there for part of that process, didn't end as I wanted, he made a lot of campaign promises and campaign pledges. And that happens sometimes when you make ones that are particularly grand, which some of us said they were at the time. When they don't come through immediately, people are more mad.
Well, let me ask about the campaign, because you had a great quote. I want to put words in your mouth so I get slugged here. You said, if I was more of a pushy broad during the race, it would have served you better. What do you mean?
Well, I would never have slugged you. But the quote was, I got interviewed by the Cambridge Gazette or something up at this fellowship I have in Massachusetts, and the reporter said something like, well, you weren't particularly known as ladylike. And I said, look, I've been called a lot of things in my career. Ladylike has never been one of them in my career or in my life. Ask my father. And one of the things I said, after having said, and I want to be clear on this, when you're a candidate, particularly for citywide or statewide office or something like that, the mistakes that get made are ultimately yours. And the candidate, and I say personally, I am responsible for the fact that my campaign did not work out. The buck stops with me as the candidate. Now, that said, with reflecting back on the campaign, I am very comfortable with the fact that to get things done in New York, and to get things done as a woman and perhaps as an LGBT person, we haven't been as represented at these kinds of tables as other communities, you got to be tough and you got to push. And I'm not afraid, and I've never been, to break some eggs to get things done if it's for the good of New Yorkers. Now, the campaign, we knew that was going to be used against me. And that's exactly the kind of thing, no offense, that the press likes to use to make a one-dimensional caricature of a candidate. But you had a successful
run as a city council speaker into, it's easy to Monday morning a quarterback, but even at the time, we were saying at the table, she can't try and run the clock out in this primary. She's got to be who she is. And sometimes the appearance was you were going to try and stay kind of above the fray here, and then he comes in and he fills that gap, especially with the community policing, broken windows, whatever you want to call it. Is that fair?
Well, look, I think I should have owned who I was more, and been less kind of not let myself so much be defined by the press in some stories that were negative at the time, and been more aggressive about the things that I believe, and I think a lot of voters would have believed, were positive about me if they were put out in the right way versus letting other people put them out, the press, and then maybe running out the clock. And you know what? I think New Yorkers like pushy.
Yeah.
And I think, New Yorkers have respect for people who are pushy when it's gotten good results for the city, and I regret not having embraced that more.
Madam Speaker, during the campaign...
Don't you love when he does that?
Go ahead, yeah. That's when he comes in for the verbal slug is next.
Not to offend. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a two-part question. At what point you were the front runner? People were referring to you as Madam Mayor, you were going to take over as the next mayor of New York. At what point on a personal level did you know when you were in trouble? What was that moment?
Right.
And what role did the mayor's son, Mayor Dante de Blasio, and his afro, in your opinion, play in this campaign?
Well, look, it's gotten kind of minimized to his afro, but I want to say, I think obviously Mayor de Blasio ran a very, very good campaign. There's no two ways around that. And that ad with his son was an excellent ad. It was unusual. It caught your attention. Usually candidates don't have their teenage son as their messenger, so that kind of difference of it was brilliant. It caught people's attention, and it talked about what was an issue that was so much on the pulse right now at that moment of time, the issues of policing out there. So it was probably one of the most effective ads we've ever seen.
Defining moment in the campaign?
It's interesting because as I look back on the campaign, there's a couple of mixed defining moments. I think, when Anthony Weiner entered the race, things really got jumbled up, right? And numbers moved around and things changed and things got a little crazy, right? So that was one moment where it was a confusing moment because things were changing and I don't think myself or the campaign actually understood why they were changing and then therefore we ended up a little flat-footed because we didn't know why they were changing, didn't know what to do about it. When we all came out of kind of that dust-up, if you will, and things had changed for the Congress member and in the race, you saw right before the first debate, now Mayor de Blasio surge, and that was a moment that, I don't know that it was the moment at all where it was like, this isn't going to happen, but it was like a, whoa, what's going on moment.
And you felt that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, when you go from being ahead by whatever I was, 10 or 8 or 10 or something like that on a Thursday, and then you're like 15 behind on a Tuesday, unless somebody sucked the blood out of your body, you feel it, you get it. It's impossible not to.
We've had Bill Thompson sitting in your chair, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dom, but I get the distinct impression from him. He said, once de Blasio went all in against profiling without any subtleties, right, that nobody else was willing to go to because there was more nuances than it, right?
Right. And that's
then
kind of the promises
owned it right away,
issue, right.
Which other people said, well, it's as simple as that. We saw where Sharpton's endorsing and then once he got there, nobody could unwind that, and nobody could put nuance
to it. There's some truth to that.
Yeah?
I think there's truth to that, and that kind of goes to the issue I was saying before about promises and expectations.
That's difficult. Really quick, I know we're up against it. Hillary Clinton, and you talked about the kind of campaign and not letting others define.
And she's doing terrific already.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think, I speak for yourself, but she's one of the electeds that you meet her in person.
Lovely.
You like her more than the camera does her favorites for. Unlike so many other phonies, and you know who I'm talking about, where all of a sudden, they're great, and then the red light goes off, and then you wouldn't want to spend 10 minutes with them. She's the opposite.
Right.
How does that get communicated, how it didn't get communicated in 08?
Well, I think just as you see on the screen, sitting down having, coffee or tea or whatever they were having with people in little coffee shops in Iowa.
Do you think people believe that's authentic, though, or no?
Well,
or it's a glorified listening tour,
I hope people believe it's authentic because I think it is. And it's interesting as I've heard some of the coverage, particularly of some of the students who met with her at one of the colleges she was at in Iowa, they sounded very impressed. And what I heard a lot of the voters say was she did less talking and more listening. And that's unusual in politics for right or wrong. So I think, and look, you got to remember when Hillary ran for Senate the first time in New York, she went all around the state and listened to people. And I was in some of those meetings, and she really was just scribbling notes and listening. And she is hungry to understand things in a deep way because she's really hungry to solve problems. And she's honestly one of the most maternal people I have ever
It's going to be
met.
Fascinating to see how this messaging compared to 08, how it's going to play. Okay, when we come back, we're going to be talking about education because tens of thousands of kids literally skipped those standardized tests yesterday as part of the opt-out movement. But is opt-out a cop-out? We'll talk about that and other education issues after this.